All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to dig into a buried history, the story of what happened in 1948. And we're going to do it by looking at the work of Israeli historians, researchers, and even the soldiers who are actually there. It's a story that, believe it or not, starts in a really unexpected place, a beautiful beach resort.
So, just imagine for a second. You're a seagull, you're soaring east over the Mediterranean, and you see this stunning coastline between Tel Aviv and Haifa, a place called Dor. It's absolutely idyllic, looks like it was pulled straight out of a postcard from Greece or Sicily.
You're looking down on these gorgeous, modern homes, soft sand, lush greenery, a real paradise. But what you might not know is that this modern paradise is built literally right on top of the spot where a quiet Palestinian fishing village named Tantura once stood. It was home to about 1,500 people who made their living from farming and the sea. So how did this story even come out? Well, it all started back in 1991. Some workers were building a new diving center, and they hit something unexpected. Just under the sand, they found human bones. They just filled the hole back in and left.
But a local fisherman, a guy named Fuad Hasadia, he saw it happen. When he asked the owner of the project what was going on, the owner kind of brushed it off. He said, "Oh, don't worry, those are just old bones from Napoleon's time." But Fuad, he knew better. His father and his grandfather had told him the real story. Those were the remains of Palestinians killed in 1948.
And that really gets us to our first section here, a resort on a grave. Because this whole story is such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? A beautiful, peaceful surface hiding a violent history that's been literally buried.
And you know, this isn't just a story passed down through generations. In 2023, a research agency called Forensic Architecture did a deep dive. They used old aerial photos, maps, and survivor testimonies to figure out exactly where the mass graves were. And their findings? They confirmed the local stories. The largest mass grave is located directly beneath the parking lot of the Nahashalim Beach Resort.
So the question is, how did a history like this get buried so deep? To really get it, we have to look at the official founding story of Israel, a really powerful narrative that some Israeli historians call the hero's tale. It's a story you might have heard before, right? It goes something like this. A people, scattered for 2,000 years, finally returns to their ancestral home. Brave pioneers arrive and make the desert bloom. They have to overcome villains, and they're led by heroes fighting for freedom. And then, just as they declare their brand new state, they're attacked by these massive enemy armies. And really, the whole thing boils down to this one powerful image, the biblical story of David and Goliath. Tiny, new Israel, standing up bravely against the giant, mighty force of the combined Arab world. This image, it's the absolute core of the national myth.
Okay, so that's the hero's tale. But the Israeli historians that our sources cite, well, they work to unpack this narrative, piece by piece. So let's dive into our third section, unpacking the founding myths. Let's start with maybe the most famous one. This slogan, "A land without people for a people without a land." It was a really central idea for the early Zionist movement. But was it really a land without people? The historical record tells a very different story. Before World War I, there were about 500,000 Palestinians living there. This wasn't some empty desert, it was a fully integrated society with cities, farms, theaters, a culture that had been there for centuries.
All right, myth number 2. Britain was the villain, the bad guy, holding things back. But the historians we're looking at, they flipped that completely on its head. They argued that without the British Mandate, which made mass immigration possible and helped suppress Palestinian resistance, the Zionist project might never have actually succeeded. And you know, this quote attributed to Winston Churchill, it really shows you the kind of colonial mindset that was at play. He basically compared the native population to a dog in a barn that has no right to own it, even if it's been living there forever. In their eyes, this way of thinking justified displacing one people for another.
And what about that David versus Goliath story? Well, according to historians like Ilan Pappé, if you look at the numbers at the start of the 1948 war, the Jewish forces, including the Haganah, were actually better trained, better organized, and they outnumbered the combined Arab armies that entered Palestine. So if it wasn't David versus Goliath, what was it? Well, that brings us to the other side of the 1948 story, what Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe.
In March of 1948, and this is key, this was before any Arab armies officially entered the conflict,
the Zionist leadership launched something called Plan Dalet. Historian Ilan Pappé describes it not as a defensive plan, but as a clear blueprint for systematically clearing Palestinians out of their towns and villages.
A key event here was the massacre at Deir Yassin. Militias went into this peaceful village and killed up to 250 civilians. The news of what happened there, it spread like wildfire. It caused absolute panic and terror, and it sped up the exodus of Palestinians fleeing their homes.
And the result of all this, it was a massive demographic transformation. We're talking about 750,000 Palestinians. That's more than half the native population who were either expelled or fled in fear, becoming refugees. Over 500 of their villages were destroyed.
The UN mediator sent to the region, a guy named Count Bernadotte, was just horrified by what he saw. He insisted that the refugees had a right to return, calling it a basic principle of justice. Shortly after he wrote his report, he was assassinated in Jerusalem by the Zionist Stern Gang.
Okay, so let's bring this all back to where we started, back to that beach resort and to the history buried just under the sand. In our final section, what lies beneath?
You see, the story of Tantura wasn't just buried in the ground, it was also buried in the history books. In 1998, an Israeli student named Teddy Katz wrote his master's thesis on the massacre, and he based it on interviews with soldiers from the very unit that carried it out. But he was sued for defamation by the veterans, his own university disavowed his work, and his academic career was completely ruined. And yet, the evidence that Katz found was just explosive. Decades later, for a documentary film, some of those very same soldiers confessed on camera. One of them, Amitzer Cohen, actually said this: "I was a murderer. I didn't take prisoners. I had a machine gun with 250 bullets, and I finished them."
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? The story of Tantura, a beautiful, idyllic resort built right on top of a mass grave. It serves as this incredibly powerful metaphor. And it leaves us with a final, lingering question. What happens, not just to a place, but to a people, when a nation's history is buried?